Today's theme for us, though, I was invited to share with you a reflection back about us as a community sector. Are we at or over the precipice? And it's a very powerful image. I've thought about that a lot, actually. And so I don't want to overwork it, but I do want us to hear it. Because earlier this year, ACOSS released our latest national survey about who we are and what is going on for such a vital part of the Australian community, the community sector. Our Australian Community Sector Survey, it is the largest and long-running of its kind. I want to thank those who respond to it out of the Salvation Army network, providing a very unique insight, Julie, into the health and state of the community sector, which is there every single day. Critically reflecting back the people who live and breathe this work. And we had almost 1,500 responses from the sector to this survey this last year, and I think that really reflected something about your desire to speak up and for your voices to be heard about what you were seeing on the front line. And so it's a very powerful data set. And so with your patience, I do want to take you through some of what this survey shared with us, because I encourage you to use it everywhere you go as part of your ongoing advocacy. This was a statement that jumped out to many of us because it's true. And I wanted to share this quote, which came from a CEO of an organisation providing children, youth and family services in Victoria. In almost 30 years in community service provision, I have never experienced a more challenging environment. And as that quote sinks in, let's think about the recent journey that we've all been on. Hard, long years of rolling crises. For some, the global financial crisis is actually not a distant memory. We're continuing to see the ongoing fallout of what happened just over a decade ago. And of course, the climate crisis, and now what we've got going on in terms of what is currently phrased the cost of living crisis. And even as I speak about it, how did we forget the pandemic? It's still with us in so many different ways. Increasingly bringing people and communities to very much the brink, the edge. This is not a shared experience across the Australian community. And if I get a moment, I might talk further about the rising inequality in our country. The Assistant Minister has shared some of that. And yet right now, governments are looking to us and to you, typically chronically underfunded and to marginalised services, to step up and do more. In the context of what we know is unfolding over this summer, you are being asked, again, to do more, to step in where the ADF may step away. The ADF is such a crucial partner with you, and I know you've forged many really vital partnerships with our forces who are on the front line often in the context of extreme weather events and disasters. And I know this is a nuanced discussion, but it's very important. I want to support you in being clear about what you can do and what you cannot step in to replace. And simultaneously, often governments are coming to our sector, drawing on stretched time, energies and our deep expertise to develop solutions without resourcing or compensating for the really vital work that must be done to bring our expertise to the table of the work of government. Whilst private consultancies are fully paid to the maximum rate, and those private consultancies often come back to you to ask for your expertise to put in to their paid work. And something is fundamentally wrong with how our sector is being treated when that is the behaviour which is repeated over and over again. So I do want to dig in a little bit deeper into what is going on around the country that would lead a CEO, who I'm sure is a very measured person, to state this most clearly to us all. What the survey has laid bare again as if we didn't already know it, is the evidence that people in Australia living in poverty and disadvantage and hardship are sinking fast and struggling to find sufficient help. People living beneath the poverty line on whatever measure you're happy to use are daily going without food, they're going without medicines, they're going without electricity, they're going without heat, they're going without cooling and really basic life essentials in one of the wealthiest countries in the entire world. Tents, caravan parks, there are no vacant and affordable rental properties. Julie, you are quite right to call out the housing crisis again. I must say I was very relieved to hear the Treasurer say yesterday in the context of his commentary about the interest rate rise that we will not see any pulling back of the investment in social housing. Thank goodness for that. Our survey has revealed that over 60% of respondents reported seeing in this reality increased levels of poverty and disadvantage amongst clients and communities. Far higher amongst family and domestic violence services, with 84% of respondents noticing increased levels of poverty and disadvantage in those communities. You can see 62% of respondents reported that cost of living pressures affected the people that they were working with in a very direct way, and this cut across all states and territories. 50% of respondents said access to affordable housing and homelessness greatly affected their service users and communities. The results among community organisations focused on domestic and family violence said that a lack of mental health supports as well as social isolation and disruption caused by the pandemic remain major issues for people, and you know it. People on the lowest incomes are some of our country's most resilient and resourceful people. Let us not allow this story to continue to be told about vulnerability as if it's some defect in the human being, but it is the circumstances in which people are repeatedly being asked to persist and to try and survive. It is appalling, as I said, that we have these kinds of statistics in a very, very wealthy country. Certainly, 64% of people were saying this. The reality is, in the jargon of complexity, what you're saying there is that it's not one problem that people are presenting with, it's now multiple. And so your pathway to walking alongside that person has become increasingly complicated. Amongst respondents observing rising poverty and increased areas of need is that rising demand for help. 2/3 of the respondents to the survey said that demand in the community for their main service had increased in the last year. Yet again, this was far higher for family and domestic violence services and financial, legal and emergency services. And so with the rising community need for help, how are you coping? Our survey's findings illustrated two experiences running parallel to each other. On one track, people living in poverty, disadvantage and hardship are seeking help with the essentials of life in far greater numbers. This is not the front page story anymore. On the other hand, community service organisations are stretched in ever more thinly ways in your determination to continue to turn up and be available to help. 3% of respondents said that their main service could meet the demand. 3%. In the previous year's survey, the statistics was double that, 6%, but still double. And at that point last time, we didn't think it could seriously get any lower when it was at 6%, and now we are down to 3%. Some parts of our sector are in more dire situations than there's others, there's no question. Housing and homelessness services particularly feature in this experience. And among the 180 participants focused on housing and homelessness, none reported that their services could now meet demand. Less than half, a total of 46% of respondents said they could usually meet demand, And overall, 4 in 9 survey participants reported that their main service, again, had seen increases in demand which they were simply unable to support. Every single one is a person. And as Winsome said earlier, with your deep commitment, you see the whole person that you are then having to turn away. 39% wait times, major issue. 44% of participants said their service received referrals because other services had reached capacity. So Julie, this is the grisly rounding, people being referred from one place to other in the desperate search for a solution. 32% said their survey had turned people away. Let's just put 1 in 3. That's 1 in 3 said that they had turned people away from help. That feeling of having to turn your back, even when desperately you want to reach your hand out. And yet again, services offering financial, legal and emergency supports, housing and homelessness, far greater numbers on every measure. 16% have had to close wait lists, simply shut the doors altogether because the list is just simply too long. So people have even disappeared from the wait list. And what also came through clearly this time around in the survey was this fact that service providers are not only grappling with your own capacity to assist people, you are increasingly concerned, almost the feeling of being overwhelmed, that the whole service system is actually at breaking point. I do think this story is really important, because our obligation is to share the truth, not to put the spin on what is actually happening. And so let's talk a little bit about the workforce situation. Remembering that overall, in the community sector, depending on which part of the sector, overwhelmingly women identified, overwhelmingly women. If you're in the aged care sector, it's 80 to 90%. Overall in the community sector, it's about 70%. The experience of managers, office support and frontline workers. Very frank feedback was received. So 68% of workers have performed at least an hour or more of unpaid work in the week. The average number of unpaid hours worked is 4.8 per week. And across the sector, about 1 hour in every 8 hours was unpaid, so 12% of total working time. This is a massive issue. It can seem marginal at first instance, but that unpaid hour of work accumulates corrosively and impacts on often very low-paid workers who are also being asked to step up and volunteer. I do want to come back to our Assistant Minister's analysis about why people on low incomes are not volunteering. It's actually because people are trying to hold down 3 jobs, or they're within the employment services system where they're being required to do wasteful, meaningless activity requirements that if they don't do, they're going to get their payment suspended. That is the transformation about what's happened to the lives of people on low incomes, not because they care about being involved in their communities. Boy, if there was anything they would rather do than be socially isolated online trying to fill in their forms for Centrelink. Where was I? Unpaid work is even more common amongst senior leaders in the sector. On average, CEOs are contributing about 13 hours of unpaid work in any week. This amounts to 26% of total paid and unpaid work hours, which I think reflects the fact that behind the scenes, leaders who are running organisations and programs are just spending hours and hours trying to make it all work, to hold workers in jobs, to deliver on the services and to deal with the complexity of the range of funding arrangements and changing conditions of work. Let's be clear, we believe this unpaid work being done throughout organisations is undertaken from a place of dedication and commitment. We know that community sector workers are passionate about helping people as best that we can. And so this survey shows again that we are always willing to go the extra distance to ensure people can access the help that they need, but not at any price. These results also reflect the significant tension faced by organisations and your staff to maintain continuity of care, both for the people to whom you provide service, but also for your colleagues and friends. Insufficient resources even to provide precious professional development opportunities, some opportunity to actually stop and to think and reflect. Really critical to your own sense of well-being as a colleague who is constantly in situations which effectively involve a level of trauma for the person that you're working with. To survive over the past 10 years, our assessment is the community sector has exhausted almost every efficiency, innovation and alternative that you can muster to make the most of increasingly constrained and limited funding. Let's not, gild the lily on this narrative that there's always more efficiencies to be found, because I know that you've all been working for a very long time to try and find them. We cannot run indefinitely on goodwill, good faith, and dedication alone. So I do want to highlight, just go here. This is some of the staff wellbeing, because wellbeing really is, we have a national wellbeing framework. Well, let's have a look at how we are travelling. 50% of respondents overall and 69% of CEOs felt emotionally drained by the work. 46% of workers said that you had felt good about your career prospects. Only 54% felt that you were getting the supervision, time, precious time that you need together. And only 51% agreed that they were getting professional development needs met. I mean, that's substantial. Half the workforce is not feeling like that you're even getting basic professional development when you are working in a highly sensitive area of responding to community demand. And of course, this flows on to retention. 75% of senior leaders said it had become more difficult to attract and retain staff, with this being an especially acute problem in regional and remote Australia. What was new and deeply worrying from these findings was a number of people saying that you were fearing for your own financial security, and that your own future was bleak if you remain working in the community sector. How much passion does it take to pay the bills? Workers are actively contemplating leaving the sector, as you know, not because of job satisfaction. Many people, I hear it, absolutely love the work. It's not that, but because you also can't make ends meet. And so I do want to just share with you some of these quotes. They might resonate with things that you are hearing from your teams and colleagues. The CEO running a child and youth service in Victoria saying, "I'm exhausted by the hustle for funding, the lack of recognition of the community sector's important work, delivering, the constant rhetoric that it's all about the private sector." Creates jobs, by the way. Anyway, the lack of recognition of the community sector's important work and delivering a leadership role with a huge and sophisticated workload for the same salary I made when I left the private sector 20 years ago. I'm also concerned that I'll not have enough money for savings and super to retire. Senior manager, mission-driven work and great workplace culture are no longer enough to attract and retain staff. We can only retain staff without dependents, no children, or with a manageable mortgage, with other financial resources behind them. So this is the back end of the inequality that's emerging within our own sector. And I work in the Northern Territory, providing multiple services. I cannot afford to keep working part-time. Although I love this job, there is no future for me. I can no longer cover my basic living expenses with the money I earn working part-time, and there is no capacity for more paid hours. So these are really important. We've pulled these out of the survey because they resonated both with the findings and also with other comments that were being made. Burnout is a phrase that can be overused, but I think in the context of what we're now seeing, 5 more minutes, Julie, thank you, it is a really serious issue. So, this is the most important 5 minutes of the speech, don't you reckon? Let's go there. I won't go through further of these statistics. I'm going to pause for a moment for those that would like to take the photo snap of it. It'll only be telling you, many of you, what you know about the inadequacy of the range of funding arrangements in the sector. And there's no question that under this federal government there has been some measures, advancements paid. I mean, you know, the money that was the $560 million over 4 years for supplementation, but it would be great for it to be paid on time and put into people's accounts so that you can actually manage the projections on your funding services. We're very aware this is a major issue. And we have a commitment, not yet action, to do further work on the design of indexation over services, and we'll continue to work very hard to push that through the processes that the Assistant Minister referred to earlier. We've backed the government on the industrial relations reforms. We do want to see decent paid wages for people in lower paid work, but that was on the condition from us, and I want to be very clear about that. ACOSS said you must fund the wage rises that should come through the bargaining processes associated with these IR reforms. These cannot be paid out of nothing. The only thing that we will see is further widening again of the gender pay gap, which none of us would want to see under the sort of values of this sector. Of course, there are some investments like in aged care. We're hoping that we will see some investment in, as part of the industrial case associated with childcare workers, that we'll see payments come into that sector. But we are very concerned that we will continuously be told there's no money. So I do just want to, I think, in this last few minutes, talk a little bit about the major reforms I think that we should be working together in solidarity for our sector, and a little bit about tax. Can I do it? Okay. So, quite clearly, I think we need to work in solidarity and in collaboration to make the case about what it takes to provide quality human services to people and stand by it. And we are actively working at the moment at ACOSS to build the sort of design of that around, you know, needs-based funding and what that looks like in age. We've got some assessment of that in aged care. We've got a debate going on in childcare, but we don't have it in the broader community services area, and we need it. That, of course, includes the things like indexation, making sure that the arrangements around increases in funding over time are adequate. That's number one. Number two is to reset properly, genuinely, the nature of the partnership with government, the length of contracts, the proper, respectful notice that if there's going to be a change in a funding program, at least 6 months, from the final decision to the actual change, and then proper, respectful transition arrangements so that colleagues and clients all have plenty of time for planning. 6 months, absolute minimum. And to get out of this, it's shocking, Julie, we still have programs being announced to being ended with very little notice and no security about what funding might happen for months and months and months. That has to stop. And putting into contracts the right kind of flexibility for you, that what you need, and we think that we could redesign these contracts in a way that genuinely reset properly the partnership relationship with the sector. And the third is about our own work on transforming. Genuinely demonstrate the values that actually underpin the community sector. I do want to highlight the ACCC report that's just come out recently to highlight again that in the context of childcare, the for-profit environment is bad news for everybody. and placing people continuously at the centre of our work. And I know that many of you, that is at the heart of how you work, and us saying that government must require that also resets the relationship of government in terms of responding to the need that we've got. We have the money available to do this. Right now, we've still got on the books $20 billion in stage 3 tax cuts. That is the stimulus the economy does not need. $20 billion does not need to go to the highest income people in the country in order for those people who genuinely do have choices about whether they spend or not, to spend more money on things that actually drive up prices. Get rid of the stage 3 tax cuts. Lift the rate of job seeker so that people can respectfully feed themselves, and when they come to you, you can work with them as a human being. It's not all about food. And let's make sure that we continue to push for better regulation of private renting, because you know it and we know it. The power imbalance there is shocking. And if we had longer-term, stable leases that treated people in those properties as human beings, entitled to live with dignity, it would profoundly change the capacity for people, as you highlighted, to be able to connect in their communities, look after their kids, get on out there, find the jobs that are out there, reskill because people desperately want to, and to get a bit of headspace to work with you on a brighter future. Thanks, Julie.